Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Yeti from Earth to Plates, and in today's video we're going to do some yontif cooking. We have the holiday Rosh Hashanah coming up, and we're going to make some food for that. So I'm going to start off with some sourdough. I'm going to feed my starter. This is early in the morning. I did not feel like talking. So I'm just adding equal parts of flour and water. I'm going to mix it together. Now what we will be making today is we're going to be making some honey cookies, some sourdough bread, some challah bread, 2 types of salmons, a pomegranate dessert. We're going to make some jalapeno garlic confit. It's one of my most popular dips that people like and request. And we're going to make some sweet carrots, which is traditional for the holiday, but I am making it differently. We're going to start off with making some honey cookies in here. I'm going to start by cracking 9 eggs, putting it into the bowl. I did record a bunch of other recipes, but if I would include them all in this video, it would be way too long, way too much work for me to edit. So I just chose a few that I wanted to share. Okay, next up here, we're going to add 2.5 cups of sugar. And just so you know, whatever recipes I am using today will be in the description down below if you want to make it as well. First of all, I have here 1 cup of oil. This video was recorded over 2 days, and it took me many hours to edit. So I would appreciate if you give it a like. Okay, if I didn't say, that was 1 cup of honey, and now I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of vanilla sugar. I'm using a 1/2 tablespoon measure, so I'll do this 4 times. And now I'm going to add 3 teaspoons of cinnamon. Now I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder and 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And last, we're going to add 9 cups of flour. Now that the dough has come together, we're going to transfer the dough into a bowl, cover it with a saran wrap, and we're going to let it rest in the fridge for 4 hours before we can shape and bake them. This will now go in the fridge for 3 to 4 hours, and then we will continue with this. Now that this is ready, I'm going to make the sourdough bread, and then we'll make our challah bread. And while the challah bread is rising, we'll make the pomegranate bars that will be for dessert. I am doing a double batch of this, so I'm making 2 breads. And I'm going to start off with 200 grams of the starter. Next up, I'm going to add 700 grams of room temperature water. Now I usually take this off the scale, because it's not good to mix it on, and I let the starter dissolve in the water fully. I don't want to have any chunks of starter in there. Now we're going to put it back on the scale. And next I'm going to add 900 grams of flour. And last for now, I'm going to add 100 grams of whole wheat flour. I'm going to mix this together until it forms a very shaggy dough. It doesn't have to be completely hydrated, because we're going to let it rest for 30 minutes. You can do 30 minutes to an hour before adding the salt, because what happens is that the salt absorbs the water. So before you start letting this ferment, you want to make sure that all the flour is hydrated. So that's why we wait to add the salt a little bit later on. Okay. Now that this is combined, I'm going to cover this with a tea towel. I'm going to let it rest. Okay, next up, we're going to be making it's called white chocolate pomegranate bars, which is the cake that I'm making for dessert. And we need 10.5 ounces of white chocolate, broken into pieces, or you can use white chocolate chips. Now, when I was in the store, I wasn't sure what type of chocolate I need. I knew that I need white. So I bought these melting chocolates. So I'm going to measure it out, and then I'll cut it up into chunks. This we'll set aside to be able to add it into the cake. I have washed, cleaned, and dried the bowl and the mix and the beaters. And now to make the cake, we're going to start off with 1 cup of sugar. Next up, we need 1 cup of margarine, which is 2 sticks, softened. Next thing to go in the bowl is 8 ounces of cream cheese. I am using a non-dairy version so that we can eat it after our meal. And a half a teaspoon of salt. We're going to mix this together until it is combined. Scraping down the sides before I add the next ingredients. I'm gonna do vanilla bean paste. I think this would be very good and enhance the flavor of this. So we're gonna do a half a teaspoon of this. I'm just gonna drip in a little bit. And I have here an egg yolk. Now we're gonna mix this until it's nice and smooth. Again, I'm gonna scrape down the center and the sides. Next, I'm gonna add in here 2 1/4 cups of flour, but while the mixer is going, and we're gonna let it go very slowly. Okay, now I'm gonna remove the beaters, and we're gonna add in pomegranate seeds and the white chocolate chunks that we cut up earlier. I removed the bowl from the mixer, put it on the counter so it'll be easier for me to combine it all. Now, next, the recipe calls for the seeds of about half a pomegranate, and we're gonna add in the white chocolate that we chopped up earlier. And we're gonna gently combine this. This cake will be baked in a 9x30 pan. We're gonna lightly grease this. And now we're gonna transfer the batter into the pan and flatten it to make sure that it bakes evenly. And this will bake in a 350-degree oven for 40 to 45 minutes. Okay, now it's time to add the salt in here. So I like to use Himalayan pink salt. So we're going to do 20 grams of that. Now we're going to add some more water, 50 grams of water, to dissolve the salt. And now I'm going to work the salt into the dough. Now, if you know that you're not going to have time to do stretch and folds, then you should just knead this at this point for 5 to 7 minutes. And then you can let it sit for 6 to 8 hours to do the shaping. For myself, I prefer to do stretch and folds every half an hour. And I do that for 4 times, so a total of 2 hours. Then I let it rest for 4 hours before I shape it. And I don't do the stretch and folds after those first 2 hours. So I'm going to cover this again and set it aside for half an hour. And during this half an hour, we're going to make our challah bread dough. I have pre-measured 5 cups of water. 1 cup is going into the bowl right away. We're going to let it cool off so we can add the yeast to it. Now I have added 3 ounces of yeast and a little bit of sugar. I pulsed the machine just to help hydrate all the yeast. I'm going to let that sit and proof. Okay, this has now proofed nicely. So we're gonna start by adding just a little bit of flour, and it's gonna make it into sort of like a paste. This recipe calls for 5 pounds of flour, so that means an entire bag of flour. Now I'm gonna add the wet ingredients, which is, I'm gonna start with 4 eggs. I have 3 cracked in here, and I have the 4th one in here. We're gonna add the remaining sugar, which was a 3/4 cup total. A 1/2 cup of oil. Now this recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of salt, but just like the sourdough, we're gonna leave that for last. Let's mix this together, and then we're gonna slowly alternate adding the flour and the water until we put in the entire 5 pounds of flour and the remainder, the 4 cups of water that we set aside. Now we're gonna let the machine do its thing and let it work the dough and knead it until it is a good consistency. Here we go, I'm adding the salt, and we're gonna continue mixing it until it's good. Okay, this is now done. And we're gonna let this dough rise now for 50 minutes. But if I leave it in here, it's just gonna explode. So I have this big bowl here. I sprayed it with some oil spray to ensure that the dough doesn't stick to the bowl itself. And now what I do is I just flip over the mixer bowl, and we're gonna let the dough fall out. Now I'm gonna pull out the dough hook. I'm gonna cover this with a plastic and a towel. The plastic so that it doesn't form a crust on top of the dough. And the towel is to give it some extra warmth. And we'll come back in 50 minutes to shape this. It's been 30 minutes, first 30 minutes. So I like to get my hands a little wet before I do a stretch and fold. And now a lot of people will go like this and lift up and pull it down. I don't like to do that because you might stretch the dough a little bit more than it can handle at the moment. So I like to do like this. I lift it up and I let it drop down. So it'll only drop down however much it could. And you can see how the dough is looking now, how it's like still chunky. And you'll see over the next hour and a half with the other stretch and folds how this dough becomes better with time. So just 3 or 4 times, cover it again, wait another 30 minutes. And I'm getting the cooling rack out because our white chocolate pomegranate bars are ready to come out of the oven. And this is what it's looking like. Pomegranates in there, you can see the chocolate in there. We're going to let this cool, and once it's completely cooled, we're going to make the frosting that goes on top. It is now time to do the second stretch and fold, and can you see the difference already in the dough? A lot of the clumps are gone, it's a lot smoother, and it's just going to get better from here. Right, it's been 50 minutes now. I'm going to take my pans that I will be baking the bread in, and I'm going to spray it with some of this spray because this has some flour in it as well, and this will help prevent the bread from sticking to the pan. So this has risen nicely. The way I like to shape my round challahs are that I take a chunk of my dough, I divide that into 6 small dough balls. I then take each small dough ball and I roll it into a log. Once I have the 6 logs, I create sort of like a basket weave. I start by putting 2 of the logs facing me with a gap in the middle. I then take 2 more and I place it across in the same way, 2 logs with a space in the middle. And finally I take the last 2 and I put 1 in the length, 1 in the width, and I start braiding. So what ends up being is that in the center they're all interlocked, and I have 3 strands of the logs going up and down and to the two sides. And then each of them I just braid into like a three-stranded braid like you do your hair or anything else. And clamp I clamp all of the ends together, just pinch them together with my fingers, and finally I take the ends, the braids, and I tuck them under to give the bread some height and to create the round shape. Once all of the challah bread is braided, I have an egg that I have just scrambled, and I am brushing it onto the bread with the pastry brush, and we're topping it with some sesame seeds. This is going to go into a 175-degree oven for 10 minutes. This is instead of doing a second proof. And then I'm going to raise the oven temperature to 350, and I'm going to bake it until it's done. I never timed it, but I'm assuming it takes roughly between 30 and 40 minutes. And now we're going to do our last and final stretch and fold for today. And you can see a difference from the first stretch and fold till now. It's amazing. And now we're going to let this rest for 4 hours before we shape it. The next thing we'll be making is some salmon and garlic salmon. I'm going to start off by greasing a pan. I'm going to put this, I am making for a meal that I will have just with my family. I will be making another fish that I will be making for when I have guests over. Now we're going to make a dressing in this bowl over here that we will then put over the top. We'll put some 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 tablespoon of lime juice, 1 teaspoon of cumin, a half a teaspoon of salt, a half a teaspoon of onion powder, a half a teaspoon of paprika, and a half a teaspoon of chili powder. We're going to mix this together, and we're going to pour this over the slices of fish. Now here I have a couple of garlics that I have sliced thinly, and we're just going to put the slices onto the salmon. And last, we're going to drizzle some of this Challah or date syrup over the top. And this will bake on 400 for 15 to 20 minutes. Okay, we're going to make the frosting for the white chocolate pomegranate bars now. We're going to start off with 1 stick of margarine, or half a cup of margarine. And we're going to beat this until it's nice and airy. And then we're going to add more ingredients to it. Now we're going to add in an 1/8 teaspoon of salt. You can add 1.5 cups of confectionery sugar. I'm going to put the cover on because the confection sugar can go flying everywhere. And now we can turn it on. I'm going to mix this together. Now we're going to have this on low, and we're going to add the pomegranate juice, and I'm going to decide if I want to add the coloring or not. And finally, we're going to add the remaining 1.5 cups of confectionery sugar. We're going to mix this on high until it's nice and creamy. I like that color. Okay, this frosting is done. I've got our cake here that is fully cooled. And we're going to spread out the frosting over the top of the cake. And now, if you remember, when we made the cake, we only did the pomegranate seeds from half a pomegranate. Some of them were set aside, and we can just sprinkle on top. And then we're going to cut these into squares when we're ready to serve it, into little bars. Hey guys, so it's been quite a few hours since we made the honey cookie dough, and I'm finally getting to it. As you can see, it's already dark outside. And it is almost time to shape our sourdough. So what I'm gonna do is I usually flour my cookie scoop a little bit, but the first time it doesn't have what to stick to. And then what I do is I take my scoop, I rub it against the side to flatten the bottom, put it onto the tray. And now if I cover it in flour, it actually sticks in there. And then the cookies should come out a little bit easier from the scoop. Now I already have my oven preheated to 350, and these cookies will bake on 350 for 12 to 15 minutes. Now I'm not going to be baking up all of this dough today. I will try to scoop all of it and I will freeze it. Like that, whenever I want to go and bake it, I can just pull out however many I want from the freezer and bake up just those. These will now go into the oven, and the rest of the dough is what I am going to shape and freeze. Now we're going to make our second fish, and this is a side of salmon that is well loved. Whenever I make it, it's always enjoyed by everyone. Now we're going to start off with a whole side of salmon. I'm going to sprinkle some of the garlic salt over the top. Just be generous with it. There's no measurements for this. We're going to add some salt, sprinkle on top as well. And some freshly ground black pepper. Now we're going to make the sauce that will go over top, and that will be a half a cup of soy sauce. I'm measuring it out. I'm going to add it to the bowl. And a half a cup of sesame oil. Now I'm going to whisk this together to emulsify the oil with the soy sauce. And we're going to drizzle about 3/4 of this dressing over the top of the fish. I then like to take a pastry brush to spread out the dressing and make sure that the entire fish is coated in it. And then before I put this into the oven, I like to wrap it up. I fold up the parchment paper so that the entire thing is covered. This will now go into a 500-degree oven for 12 minutes. And while this is baking, I am going to start prepping the vegetables that go with it. So we're going to have one of each red, orange, and yellow peppers. And the recipe calls for 2 jalapenos, but the jalapenos is the favorite part for most people, so I do 3 of them. The bell peppers get cut into strips. The jalapenos get cut into rounds. And I'm going to set that aside until we're ready to add it to the fish. Now I'm going to move on to making a jalapeno garlic confit. That is one of the favorite salads that whenever I share it with anyone, they're like, oh my god, this looks so good, I need the recipe. So for this, I start off with 2 jalapenos and 4 any type of spicy red pepper, whatever I could find in the store that week. And I slice them into these as well. I add it to my oven table dish. I add some garlic, cumin, smoked paprika, salt, and pepper. This will bake on 350 for 45 minutes. You'll see the fish will bake at the same time. So I like to do this together so that they can both bake at the same time. I top it all with some avocado oil, and I mix it all together with a spoon to make sure that the oil is getting everywhere, the spices is mixed together, everything is just like nicely combined. And then I top it with some more oil to make sure that everything is submerged. And I will again push everything down to make sure that it is all in the oil. Now I took the fish out of the oven. I adjusted the oven temperature to 350. I am adding the peppers to the fish, and I'm gonna mix together the soy sauce and sesame oil again to make sure it is emulsified again because it tends to separate. And we're gonna drizzle the remaining dressing over top the peppers. I forgot to say that at this point I also topped the salmon with the sesame seeds. And now I will bake it on 350 for 40 to 45 minutes. And this is why I like to do it together with the jalapeno garlic. It is now the next morning and it is time to bake the sourdough. So I start off by preparing 2 pieces of parchment paper cut roughly in a square. And I am getting some flour out to dust the tops of the breads. And I am pulling the bread out of the fridge. I am realizing now that I didn't show you guys how I shaped these. I believe I did record them. I will try to find the video. If I do, I'll add it to the end of the video. So I take my tea towels and I just pull it up and flip it over on top of the parchment paper to release the bread. I tap it all with some flour. I just massage it in and then I score. And as you can see, I cut each score twice. I feel like you get a better result that way. The ears tend to like pop up. There's a bigger chance of that happening. And I'm showing you two of my favorite methods of how to cut them. So the circle one, I don't go all the way around. Now it's time to bake it. These have been in the oven as the oven was preheating to 500 degrees. And we're just going to drop the breads into those preheated Dutch ovens. And then we're going to cover it and we're going to bake this for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, I am lowering the oven temperature to 450 degrees, removing the covers, and these will bake for an additional 30 minutes. Once these are done, I remove the Dutch ovens from the oven. I take the bread out by lifting up the ends of the parchment paper and then just pulling out the parchment paper so the breads can cool on the cooling rack. And I usually take it to my table to let it cool over there. The last thing I'm prepping is the sweet carrots. And I am using a combination of carrots from the store and some carrots from the garden. The smaller ones are from the garden. And I'm just cutting them into some rounds. I peeled them and I washed them. The last thing I will be making is whiskey glazed carrots. I started by preheating the skillet to high heat. I'm gonna let the 1 tablespoon of butter melt. I'm gonna add the carrots in here and I'm gonna cook it for 60 to 90 seconds. Now the recipe calls for a half a cup of Jack Daniels or other whiskey. I don't have the Jack Daniels today, so we're gonna use a whiskey that I have in the house. We're gonna let this cook down for 30 seconds. And then we're gonna add the rest of the butter, which is a stick of butter. That has cooked down nicely. I'm gonna lower the heat now to medium, and we're gonna let this melt. It smells delicious. I love the smell of the whiskey cooking down. Now that the butter has melted, I have here a half a cup of sugar. So the recipe says to sprinkle it. We're gonna stir this together, and then we're gonna add our carrots back in. I'm gonna try to get this the flattest possible. And then I'm gonna cover this and let it cook for 5 minutes. Okay, it's now been 5 minutes, so we're gonna remove this. Now the recipe calls for a half a teaspoon of salt, up to 1 teaspoon, and freshly ground black pepper to taste. And we're going to let this cook down until the sauce thickens, which is roughly about another 5 minutes. Okay, so this sauce looks nice and thick. The carrots feel nice and tender, nice and cooked through. So we're just gonna remove that from the pan, put it into a bowl or a platter, and then I'm gonna pour the sauce out of the pan into this bowl as well. So the sourdough here is ready to be shaped. So I got here 2 smaller bowls, and I'm gonna put in some tea towels. Now I don't have a banneton with liners, and I've done this ever since I started making sourdough, and I've never had issues with it. Now what I like to do is I sprinkle some flour on my surface. I get the sourdough, and I'm gonna flip it over and let it fall out. Next, I take my bench scraper and I divide the dough roughly in half, and I flip over one side, top and bottom, and then I take from the side that I cut and I turn it onto itself. And I start forming it, but then I let this rest and I come back to this one. Sprinkle some flour on the top. I drop it into the bowl upside down, and I sprinkle some flour on this side as well. Then I usually tuck in the sides to help contain the rise while it's resting in the fridge overnight. So guys, while I shape that one on camera, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this video. If you've enjoyed it, hit the like button. I would appreciate if you can subscribe as well. Like that you can keep up with what I'm doing in the kitchen and out in the garden. And I'll link some more videos on the screen for you guys to watch between now and my next upload. Thank you so much for watching.